Good day, strategy gamers, and welcome back to episode 17 of our Let's Play series of War in the East 2, Stalingrad to Berlin. In this episode, we're going to be completing the second half of turn 9 with the ground movement phase from Stalingrad down to the Crimea. Then we're actually going to take a look at a mechanic that we have not really dived into at all yet, and it's a bit of a shame considering its importance to the game, and that is logistics. So it would be impossible, even if we took the entire hour of the episode, to cover every facet of logistics in this game. And going with our methodology of trying to turn by turn, episode by episode, introduce slowly mechanics to the players so they don't feel overwhelmed, we're just going to take a quick high level look at some features of supply that are important for the player to understand. And in particular, I think this is appropriate timing for such conversations as you saw in the previous episodes most recently. The priority for us right now is understanding the supply issues that we have and how can we combat them, right? That balance of we have opportunities tactically on our front lines where there is no opposition, but we also find ourselves out of supply, or in difficult supply situations, I should say. And we need to balance those two competing demands that we are faced with. So with that, let's jump right on in. We're going to go over the Stalingrad pocket first. And normally what we'd do is we'd review any battle results and such from turn 8 that the German player may have had from counterattacks. But what we know from the last episode is that there were no counterattacks pretty much anywhere from Smolensk and south. Right, so more than half of the front lines, the Germans had no counterattacks, and that's actually been a trend of about 2 or 3 turns now, which tells me we must be doing something right in the south near Stalingrad. And Smolensk probably is going to be the tough nut to crack because they do seem to be quite reinforced there. So let's begin first with the actual Stalingrad pocket, right where the German forces are currently surrounded in the city. And what we decided in the previous turn, 2 episodes ago, was, well, we could continue to wait for their supplies to deplete over and over again over time, right, as a natural consequence of they need food to eat, and each turn that passes is 1 week that they've consumed food worth of. What we decided was the cost of Stalingrad staying occupied and preventing us from having its infrastructure network is greater than the losses we are going to incur, than the losses we will take along this entire front line by not being connected to the rail network. So if we turn on the rail mode real quick, these red icons indicate that these rail lines are damaged, broken, out of supply, etc. Which means none of these units down here are in a situation where they can be resupplied because they are currently not connected to the rail networks that run through Stalingrad. So the sooner we can resolve this crisis, the sooner we can get these units back in supply and they can continue their push southward towards Rostov, which is one of the strategic objectives we have for this series in the early turns. So let's focus our attention back to the Stalingrad pocket proper. We'd pushed back here in this hex and this hex in the previous turn. So we had 2 victories, but we also had a number of defeats along the front line. And I think what we're going to do is toss on our fortification mode, right? So we can again see kind of the areas where it's going to be easiest to attack. And in almost, I think every single hex here, an important differentiator now that we've collapsed their pocket just by 2 hexes is that the limit of 3 units per hex will pertain, and all of these hexes are now saturated with 3 units in each hex. And really, you can actually see just from going through a quick preview here, a number of these units are much weaker than they were even just last turn. So I think our offensives had some success. Probably the 2 hexes that we will be certain to stay away from this turn are going to be up here in the north. I think we're going to focus right here on this northeastern tip, south, and this hex right here. So let's first go with this hex because I think this is a really important one if we can blast through here. So let's take all of our units we have here and see what's the math if we attack. So that's 21 to 6.7. Okay, so that's actually pretty good odds. But what we're going to do before we actually go ahead with the attack is I want to take a couple of these units like the 13th Guard, and I want to see, can we maybe assign some support units to them to help them break through. So they're part of the 62nd Army, and we can see that we can attach the 84th Tank Brigade, which is at 97% TOE, so it's pretty full strength. So hopefully that Tank Brigade can help the 13th Guard. And then let's also take a look at the 95th Rifle Division and see what there might be. And I think we might attach to it one of these anti-tank regiments. Looking at some of these other units, I'd really prefer to do it on some that have slightly lower fatigue, slightly higher combat prep. But the number of those that exist right now actually are pretty low. This unit, I think we had moved off the line. So what we will do is we will assign to this another anti-tank regiment. And what we're going to do is take one of these that are higher fatigue, lower combat prep off of the line, and I think we're going to choose the 138th. Mostly because its general supplies level, which is this first one, is only at 42%, which is pretty low. So we're going to take them off the front line and swap them out with the 112th Rifle Division, which has a much higher combat value. Up here, I think we might be able to take this 193rd Rifle Division and do the same thing, where I think the best unit to take off might be the 115th, looking at this. Let's see, this is 75%. Yeah, I think we're going to take off the 115th as an added reason, because it is a brigade, not a division level. Doesn't necessarily mean it's in a better supply situation or anything like that. It's just probably slightly better positioned. And here, I think we're going to take this 64th Rifle Division. We're going to move them over here. And this is part of the 66th Army. We're going to assign to that, I think, the 58th Tank Brigade. So now that we've tried to beef up a little bit our attacking forces, we're going to select these units again and see what the math is now. So we were at 21 to 6.7. Now we're at 26 to 6.7. So we really did improve our position just by kind of taking a look at exactly what are we attacking with and how can we improve the situation. It is snowing, we are crossing a river, and they do have a fortification level of 2. And if we remember our fortification level measures, 2 is that they've built some basic trenches, there's some camouflage of defensive units, etc. It's better than foxholes, but it's not as strong as, say, concrete pillboxes. It's kind of an in-between. We're going to go ahead and proceed with this attack and see if we can push them out. And infantry division surrendered, and this infantry division retreated. Great success. Let's now take this stack, and I actually don't know how many of you are going to be able to move. I don't know that we want to bring in the rifle brigades. Can we bring in that rifle division? We cannot. That's going to exhaust those units too much. So we're going to hold off on moving there because I'm hoping maybe there be another part of the front line here. We may have an opportunity to move someone up. We are going to take, I think, the 260th Rifle Division, though, and move them over into this hex to just reinforce where we had taken a unit out of there. I don't anticipate them counterattacking, but there's no reason to just invite a counterattack. Now you might be asking yourselves, well, surely just a little bit of patience on this front line, and this front line isn't that crazy. And I'd agree with you, especially considering, as we've discussed, there is a by-turn natural decay of units depending on where they are and what they're doing, in terms of supply levels, right? So, for example, we've talked about any unit that is bordering a hex that has an enemy unit. The game is still simulating for that week patrols, scouting parties, snipers on the front line, all of these different things. So as an example, the ammunition supply level automatically decreases just right off the bat by 1% each turn that you have a unit in a hex next to an enemy unit in a hex. So if we wait at 10 turns, that's just an automatic 10% reduction in their ammunition supplies, much less how much they will lose if we actually had any attacks, right? But I think that, again, we just have to put the pressure on given the supply situation we find ourselves faced with. Next, let's maybe take a look, I think, at this unit right here to see if we can't push through. And we're going to take, I think we're going to take both of these units off the front line, and we're actually just going to move up from these other stacks different unit. Well, maybe one of these we can leave. So let's, which is in the better position. We're going to take the 47th Guard. We're going to take them off the line. And then we're going to move the 50th Guard up. And we'll move the 16th Corps up. And I think we're going to do the same thing, right? Of just, first, let's check our math. And I only want to take these 3 hexes. I'll explain in a moment why. And that's 21 to 5. So that's 4 to 1 odds. Without even attaching support units, I think we're going to go ahead and attack. Especially considering their fortification level is just 0, right? Just a flat 0. So let's go ahead and attack. And they retreated, and surrendered. And it looks like they retreated down here to this hex, which did previously just have 1. So perhaps if we had done this in a better order, we could have managed the situation a little better. I'm not sure yet on that. Now I think we're going to take, we have to really think some of this through here, right? Because the reason I wanted to just do these 3 stacks is I now want to have this unit, and hopefully whatever we can move here, attack here. So if we were only taking this stack, it's 5.4 to 2.9. So it's 2 to 1. If we can get another full stack here that has enough combat preparation points and combat value to contribute to this, I think that will be very helpful. And I think it's going to have to be this stack here of rifle divisions. They're only combat value 1. They have low combat prep. They're pretty high fatigue. Their ammunition levels are at 60%, which is not great. But I think they're the only ones who have enough movement points and have the ability to move down into this hex and to support the attack. So we're going to use them. So we're going to take both these 2 hexes and we're going to attack here, which is 9.1 to 2.9. So let's actually see if we just can't make sure, because I've had a couple of turns now where I've done, yeah, we'll be fine, we'll break through, and it's just led to failure. So we're going to see what we can add to support, say, the 5th Tank Army, 8th Cavalry Corps. And I think we'll take this 133rd Tank Brigade and attach them. And then let's also take this Motorcycle Regiment, I think, actually. So those are now attached. And then let's also take a look. I think we'll do this 38th Rifle Division from the 64th Army. And we're not going to attach a Tank Brigade because they are really kind of too low in supply. And from here we had the 24th Army. Let's maybe take the 273rd. And we will attach the 91st Tank Brigade. So we had pretty much 9 to 3 was the odds. Now we're at 11 to 3. Almost 12. So let's go ahead and execute this attack. And we are successful. So 3 divisions surrendered. And they lost a depot there. I think by next turn this entire pocket will be gone. That's very optimistic of me to say, but I think it will be gone next turn. So let's take now all of these units, and what happens if we attack here? It's 21 to 10. So that's only 2 to 1 odds. But I do know that 2 of the units that are in there have already fought a battle this turn. And I'm wondering if maybe their defensive combat value isn't overstated. I think it was the 129th Infantry that was here all along. And the 76th and the 29th Motorized Division were the ones that move down into this hexta in their retreat from up here. So again, let's do the same thing we did previously where we look at, okay, how can we reinforce the attacking units here? And an example I would have would be this 4th Guards. If we can actually move them down, and to do so, I think we're going to take the 7th Rifle, and we're going to move them over here, and then we can take the 39th Guard down here. Back here, let's take this 29th Rifle Division. And we're doing like this little side shuffle of these units, right? Just everyone's moving down the line a little. All right. I'm wondering if this tank corps has enough to come up and support. It doesn't look like it. So now what does the math look like? We had 2 to 1. Now we almost have 3 to 1. So let's do, again, same situation. These are part of the 64th Army. Let's take a look at this guard. And yeah, I don't think we're going to attach anything. What about over here? What army is this? This is the 62nd Army. Let's take this 39th Guard and see what we could do. And just anti-tank regiments. And the reason I'm not too terribly interested in those is I don't think we're going to have much. I don't know that they will even have any armor here unless it's just a couple of, say, SPs that are supporting the front line. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to attack this. We're going to give it a shot. If we can break through here, I think by the end of turn 10, we can have this entire Stalingrad pocket gone. It's optimistic, but I think it's achievable. Worst case, turn 11, Stalingrad pocket's gone. So let's go ahead and attack. They held. They held. No. No, 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 no. Okay. Do we have enough to try it again? 3.8 to 9. They were barely weakened at all. You know what? I'm going to say maybe the combat values are wrong. They were not wrong. They held. They held very far out. What else could we do to try to break through there? Is there any other option? We don't have enough to go there. We may have if we would have done the 2 stacks originally, but we don't now. Okay. Alright, so this might stretch out then all the way to turn 12 because we weren't able to eliminate that hex. Still, some fantastic progress here on this front line. So I think we're going to take some of these units and really just going to move them up enough that it's a deterrent not to attack more than anything else. Not that we think this is the ideal defensive position here. So we have these 3 brigades. I actually think we might see we build these up. Yes, now we have a rifle corps. So I think that will help a little. This rifle division is high fatigue and can't even make it there. That brigade can't. Rifle division can't. Surely we can get one more unit over here. About this 66 Naval Rifle Brigade. Can you make it there? You can. Alright, you have been redeployed. Alright. And then over here we need to make sure we advance as well. So I think we're going to take the 2 tank corps. I thought they would have enough to get up there, but I guess not. Can none of these move in? They're all 1 and 1. Yeah, wow. We really don't have enough to get up. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate. I'm hoping they don't move back in there. Then that might stretch it up to turn 13. My goodness, we really don't need that. Still, great progress this turn. Really happy with that. Let's just do a quick little recap here, right? So, like here, we had a total of 7,000 men and 83 guns just wiped out of this pocket. Even though we lost here, they lost 1,000 men out of 3,600. We took much heavier losses, though. We lost almost 4,000 men and 27 armored fighting vehicles, my goodness. Up here, they lost another 7,000 men and 100 guns. The 94th Infantry retreated. And here, they lost 11,000 men, 18 armored fighting vehicles, 111 gun platforms. All right. And I'm really happy, too, that it was their Panzer Division that had surrendered. Maybe would have been better at their motorized if they were of a higher strength, but that was good. That was very, very good. So now that we've done that, we're going to look down here, and we've been talking about this, right, where we have this columnar approach of these two rail lines moving into kind of the heart of their territory. And we're just going to have their flanks, right, where there is no rail line here. They're just going to be a little slower in their advance. I'm going to turn the fortification level off there. Right, so that's why they're all the way back here, even though the front line has moved up so considerably. I think we might actually take this opportunity to cover the new mechanic around some of the supply discussion that we want to have in this episode, because I think it's relevant to the decisions that we need to make here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the rail damage info screen, and I'm also going to turn on the logistics info, and I'm also going to turn on the roads, which is something we haven't been playing with on, but it's useful for these conversations. And what's important here is a number of things, right? So red means the railroad has damage and is not active, right? Green means the railroad is just fine. Yellow means if there was a railroad taken or repaired, what it's saying is this hex, the railroad is actually functional. It's working. But it's yellow because it's not connected to a rail line. Right? So it's like this isolated section of railroad track that's in working order, but it's not connected. So it's effectively not effective. Wow. That was pretty bad. It's effectively not being used, right? Maybe that's a better way to say it. I want to hop over to the Smolensk front real quick, because I think this illustrates another part of the mechanic of the railroad repair. So here we have all of these green railroads in and around Moscow, right, where our fronts have been established for a very long time. Good, healthy supplies all along here, right? And we have, I'm going to turn off the chips as well. So we have as well these two lines that are going out to Velikli Luki, right, which is kind of this crossroads section of the front. There's two lines going. One is perfectly functional for us. Another one is listed as yellow. And that's because these two hexes right here have rail damage. Now you'll note that they're not colored red. The reason they're not red is because, if we turn chips back on, they're being repaired by these railroad construction brigades. And these construction brigades are actually saying, you know, these two rail hexes, next turn they're going to be fixed. And when they become fixed, what it will mean is, in theory, and should work this way, this entire line is going to turn green, which will then mean we can use that rail line. When we hover over in the tooltip, I can't move my mouse around the tooltip because then the tooltip goes away, but kind of in the middle of the tooltip, it says Soviet rail usage 0. It's a rail line that's functional, but we're not using it. If we go up here to this rail hex, for example, we see that Soviet rail usage 3,304. If memory serves correctly, the numbers that we see there represent tons of freight moved. right? So 1 ton of freight might equal 1 ton of ammunition or 1 ton of general supplies, right? Like foodstuffs for the soldiers. So effectively, you can think of it as 3,304 tons were moved across that 10-mile stretch of railroad in the last 7 days. And that all gets executed. I believe it's during the logistics phase specifically. So that's kind of a summary of the railroads and the color coding and why it's important, right, to keep these in mind. Because for the most part, your supplies get transferred via railroads. Now, there is this whole aspect of ports and sea freight and all of this. We're not even going to touch on it a little bit in this episode because, while it does matter to the game, it's just some concepts and additional stuff to learn that doesn't have immediate relevancy because we haven't been dealing with anything around ports and naval interdiction and all of these other mechanics. We're just going to pretend like we live in this happy world where all we have to think about is railroads. So let's keep thinking about railroads, right? Railroads move most of your freight. The only way really for the freight to move in meaningful ways other than the railroads is by roads. So a combination of having roads and a motor pool, which are vehicles that are represented in the game, and they're destroyed in combat, and they're damaged in weather, and they suffer movement penalties when there's blizzards, which we can't ever seem to get out of. Those are the two ways that freight is delivered really to your units: roads and vehicles. Now, we added in this roads toggle on our map info, which is the shortcut is Control R. Railroads is just R. So if you do R and Control R, you're going to get a good representation of your kind of supply routes. You see over here that there's a lot of area of our front line where there's not a road connecting to that rail line. So what that means is that the freight we're bringing up to the front line here has to go cross country through heavy woods, light woods, and swamp. Right? So you just imagine like these 2-track logging trails and these lorries full of crates in the back of ammunition rounds and all of that, trying to get through feet worth of snow in these blizzard-like conditions. Oh, and by the way, the terrain switches between heavy woods and swamp. Right? Of course, when we look at our supply situation, we see a lot of units that have supply difficulty here. Right? It's it makes a lot of sense why that's the case. Now, the last big thing that I want to touch on is depots. Okay. So we have been allowing the AI to manage our depots. Normally, if you really have an understanding of the logistics and supply operations of the game, and maybe towards mid to late game of this series, because we still have a lot of mechanics to introduce you to, we may start to manually manage some of the depots. But for the foreseeable future here, we're going to continue letting the AI populate these and manage them, right? But the depots are important for this reason. Freight is moved, I'm going to really try to simplify this. Freight is moved from your cities, your towns, your factories, on rail lines or roads, to depots. From the depot, the supplies then get sent to your units, to your HQ, and then the divisions and the brigades of your armies, right? So right here we have a depot. And when we hover over it on the tooltip and try to ignore like the whole bottom half of the tooltip here, because that's all airbase related things, which we're going to ignore that for now because, well, it needs to stop snowing before we can care about that. So the top half of the tooltip, it says depot, rail yard 1. So that's the level of rail yard. I think it goes up to, what is it, 9 in total? Something like 9, I think, is like the highest you can have. rail yard 1, so it's the lowest level of rail yard. So think of just this simple little station. There's track splitting, there's maybe some storage for freight cars, stuff. It's just a simple operation. It also has 3,534 trucks, and it has 706 freight that's gone through the depot. The depot has received 8,694 tons of freight. It is storing 706. So it was sent in the last week, I'm just going to round here, 9,000 tons worth of freight. 6,837 of those tons left the rail yard to go out to the units in the field, right? So a pretty high percentage, right? 706 tons were left behind, and think of it as like your reserve, right? Like your emergency rations that you have in the warehouse. That's what was left behind. What was lost, and I probably need to do some research on this, but I'm assuming it's lost in terms of like spoilage, right? Food going bad, accidents happening and unloading it, theft even, right? Lost were 1,144 tons, which is really high, but probably has to do with the conditions of being close to the front, having severe weather, and a lot of not restraints, a lot of pressure on this rail line because it's all going through this one line. The rail yard has a capacity of 45,000 tons of freight, but it only received 9,000. So what that tells us is that this depot is really not getting the amount of supplies that it probably should, given the fact that we have so many units here that are in not critical, but low supply situations. It also says that the units that are supplied by this, it used 3,293 of their trucks to move that freight from the depot, right? So this infantry division, let's actually see if we can open this up. Let's look at the 33rd Rifle Division. We go to elements. I think it's under support. Maybe it's not listed there, actually. Somewhere in here, I know we can find this. Oh, here we go. Vehicles, right? So this 33rd Rifle Division has 48 vehicles, or trucks, right, or supply vehicles. It has 48 of them. It needs 31, right? So it's saying it can supply itself if it has 31 vehicles, but it has 48, so it means we have more vehicles than is needed, which is a good situation to be in, right? So this 33rd Rifle Division, from this frontline hex here, and remember, each hex is 10 miles, right? In the span of 1 week, it sent trucks, about 48 of them, 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles, 40, 50, 60, 70 miles to get supplies. And then you know what it did? It drove 70 miles, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Congratulations and thank you for listening to me count in multiples of 10. It drove 140 miles to and from the depot to supply itself. And when you're going through, again, swamp, heavy woods, and all of these other factors, it's probably going to run into some supply situations. So it says its supplies are 54, but it needs 85. And I think these are still represented in tons, if I remember correctly. Okay, so it needs it needs 85 tons worth of food supplies and general supplies, but it only got 54. It's not motorized, it has no armored fighting vehicles, so it only needs 4 tons of fuel, which makes sense. And that's why this unit here is sitting with 63% of the general supplies that it needs and only 59% of the ammunition that it needs. So we're really diving into the, hey, how are these units getting supplied, right? But I'm hoping this starts to paint a picture of when I'm going to hop back over here to the Stalingrad front where we've been leaving off. When we look at this situation, it really kind of puts it into context for you, doesn't it? That this unit here has to send, the 3rd Guards has to send their trucks, which I'm now starting to question if this is the number of supply trucks, but it may still be. It's sending all of these trucks 10, 20, 30, etc., 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 number of miles to a depot and then back to the unit to resupply itself. And that's how we find ourselves in positions where it only has 35% of the general supplies it needs, 83% of the fuel supplies it needs. It is a monumental task to get supplies to some of these units, and that's why we currently have this situation of suffering. I think it'll be the last kind of topic that we cover with this in supplies is these depots, right? They can have different levels of priority, and like I'm looking at this one here, it didn't receive 55 tons of freight. And I'm not sure exactly how that happened because of the railroad. So what I'm assuming is trucks supplied this depot, or it was air resupply. I didn't look to see if maybe there was an air resupply mission in the previous turn. It doesn't look like it. So that it effectively got no supplies, right? It's 0%. But normally this is where these units would be getting their supplies from. Actually, I wonder if this isn't the depot that we captured. And I think that's the same thing here. I think these are the depots that we captured, and those are simply leftover supplies from what we captured. I'll have to research that one as well. Up here, we actually do see the depots we have and the supplies they're receiving, right? And these are all connected to the rail line, and supplies and freight are moving along the rails to try to reinforce the situation. One of the other mechanics is that a unit, it will resupply from the nearest depot to it, and I think it's actually nearest depot to its HQ unit, then determines which one. But the unit that's in resupply, it has to be within 30 hexes or 75 movement points, whichever is less, right? It has to be within that range of a depot for it to become supplied by that depot, right? So we're finding ourselves in this position where if we continue advancing here, the only way these guys are going to get any resupply is through air resupply and just trucks going literally hundreds of miles to try to resupply these units. So if we keep going and going, and the Germans say, yep, we've been sitting here cozy near Rostov, we're in full supply, we've had reinforcements coming in from Deutschland, and you hit our front lines with 10% ammo conditions, and now we're going to counterattack. That would be a big problem. So given that whole explanation of supplies and the situation we find ourselves in, and how frankly near desperation I think we are with some of this, what we're going to do is now exit our supply screens here. So I'm going to turn off the rail, I'm going to turn off, nope, not that one, the roads, and I'm going to turn off the supply. So now we're just back to the usual map that we see. What I'm going to do is, for example, with this unit, I'm actually going to retreat it back up here. I'm going to get it back a little further from the front line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this unit up just a little bit. Just so that way this Belaya Kalatov, we've taken that. But now we're going to retreat again. We're going to go back up just a little bit, back up that front line. And we're just going to hold. It's boring as all heck, and boy, it might even remind you of how our air war has been going. but it's the best decision so we don't overextend ourselves. With that, we've done the Stalingrad front. We've moved back a little bit, actually, with these two pushes here along these two rail lines. This will still be our objective, by the way. Once we solve for Stalingrad, repair those rail lines, and get rail supply coming back down here, we will continue this exact same approach of, listen, our goal is to connect the Caucasus front with our Stalingrad front via this rail line, and for us here to push down on Rostov with a huge concentration of forces coming from the southeast. Pretty much encircling Rostov is what we will end up doing, pending, of course, having to fight the German line. Moving then to the front that we have down in the south by the Caucasus region, what we're going to do here is we are going to keep advancing a little bit, just a little bit. And the reason for that is I am much less concerned about the Germans counterattacking down here. There's just no... I cannot think of any good tactical or strategic reasons for them to deploy forces to try to counterattack here other than just holding Rostov. So we're not going to go all the way up to Rostov, but I think we can still slowly keep moving up a little. And although this rail situation is like the image of desperation, it won't be like this forever, right? It's a little different than with Stalingrad, because in Stalingrad we're sitting here going, yeah, the rail lines are knocked out. Oh, and we don't even control the territory that we need to reestablish the rail lines. Here, at the very least, we have a very, don't know if I'd say secure front, but stable front line with no enemy opposition in sight, and just a huge swath of territory for us to go and do a little bit of Bob the Builder stuff, right, and repair the rail lines. Turning off that view again. Probably going to get pretty sick of seeing that view by the end of this episode. So we'll move a couple of these units up, continuing the push, trying to capture some of these things like these ports. So, I said I wasn't going to get into ports, and maybe I still shouldn't. Unless there is, let's just label it as naval mechanics and air mechanics that we're not going to touch on in this episode. If you control one of these ports, it can act as a bit of a rail yard and depot for you, right? So instead of a rail line supplying that hex, in theory, right, it's sea transport supplying it, and a depot can be established there that then can resupply units. And I'm pretty sure that's the whole reason that when we look down here, let's actually take a look at this. Yeah, you see, these units aren't in this disastrous supply situation, because this port is receiving supplies through naval replenishment, and then trucks are ferrying those supplies 10, 20 miles, right? Pretty short distances compared to the other areas we've been looking at, and then resupplying the units. And the exact same thing happening down here. Like, look at all these depots we have. So taking things like Yesk will actually probably help then supply units in this little patch of the front, right? So we're going to keep doing that for a little bit. Otherwise, though, we're just going to kind of be at a bit of a standstill. I think we'll take a couple of these units and just try to get them on the infrastructure line instead of sitting out here in the middle of nowhere. But other than that, we're just going to kind of stay as we are. I think we'll bring this unit up here. HQ unit, that was. And I think we're even going to move up this HQ unit to Krasnodar to get it a little more central to all the other HQ units that we have. Okay. And we're actually going to move our HQ unit onto our depot here. And we're going to move these units there as well. And we're going to turn these two rifle divisions to refit. So they're on a depot that is in supply on their HQ and in refit status. That, by the way, is it's actually not the perfect min-maxed way to reinforce and replenish and resupply a unit, but it's pretty close. Like there are very few things you can actually add to that process to make these guys reinforce faster. I'm gonna turn back off the depot mode. Although I may start turning it on more often than we have been. I don't think we stand a great chance, especially as their fort level has actually continued to increase. But I feel like we have to keep the pressure on. So that's 1-to-1. We're going to do it, though. Just on the slightest of chances that we can break through. And again, with the ever-present hope of... Did we actually lose a unit? My goodness, I did not expect that. I had 2 divisions and a corps. Yeah. And this division routed. Well, I did not expect that to happen. Lost 1,300 men. They lost 262. What I would do for ground support right here. Seriously. That would be so useful right now. And again, I think it's always been a long shot that we're successful here, but on the off chance we could get lucky and break through somehow, just... I'm not going to say it would change the entire scenario in the war, but it would be very, very impactful. Yeah. So I think that wraps it up for our ground units down here in the Caucasus regions. And I know that on the Stalingrad pocket we had a lot of success, but it was a little bit more, I don't want to say laid back and boring here with these units. Actually, let me take a look, and I think we're going to move this HQ unit back to this city. What we're going to do is we're going to put a couple of these units on the HQ itself. We're just going to pull these back, right, and form a slightly tighter pocket. And bring these onto the city. Okay. And this HQ unit. I'm going to take the 402nd off the HQ unit here. That works. The 110th CD Cavalry Division. That makes sense. Oh, right. We are moving you from back here. I remember that now. And we need to assign you, though, to this HQ unit. There we go. Now you can come up. I'd forgotten we had you there. Okay. Before we end the turn, I think we are also going to take a look at our info screens and our reinforcement and withdrawal schedule. And we're going to see if we got anything on map here. And it doesn't look like we did in turn 9. Other than the fact that we now have all of these heavy tank regiments that have joined the Soviet reserves. And these rifle divisions that were moved to the Transcaucasus theater box. I think what we might do, actually, is go to our build new unit screen and see if maybe we... Can we maybe build some tank corps or something here? Yeah, so these 3 are all in the Soviet reserves right now. We're going to build this. We're going to build this. We need a motorized to be able to finish this. So we're going to build a motorized brigade. Go back to tank corps. See, now we have that. We'll build you. We can do another tank brigade, another motorized brigade. Right, we're building the components to get to a tank corps. Do one more motorized brigade. And another tank corps. Okay. Well, that's exciting. So now when we look at the reserve box, we should see those. So we have the 13th, 14th, 17th, and 7th tank corps. When we look at it, though, they are still building up. So let's just nitpick on this one in particular. So it's TOE, right? Like armored cars, we only have 7. We really should have 27. Labor squad, we have none, which looks like that should be one of the easier ones to reinforce. Motorcycle squad, we only have 9. We should have 12, etc., etc. Okay. Recon tank. So that's probably going to be the T-70 that we're using there. Medium tanks, T-34 still. Okay. Yeah, so when those get replenished, though, that's going to be pretty nice. And actually, yeah, it's on refit status. That's good. Let's see if there's not anything we can take here, though. So like this separate tank regiment. I think we can go back to the build menu. So we have this separate tank regiment. Yeah, so that's what we have here. Okay. All right. Tank core. Oh. Hi there. Combat value 5.8. No combat prep. TOE is pretty much at 100%, but you're missing anti-tank guns. We're only at 66%. I'm wondering, though, I think we might deploy the 20th Tank Corps. So let's move it to map. Okay. That's done. We're bringing in reinforcements, guys. We're taking things from the reserves and we're putting them in the map. Here. Yep, you're in the same situation, so you can come into the fight. Move you. I really probably wouldn't be doing this if we hadn't just formed these tank corps. And my theory here is that by the time these get deployed, and if there was some type of big German counterattack, offensive, etc. that we needed to respond to, by the time all that developed, then these 4 tank corps should be worked up to the point to where we can deploy them. Here we again have same situation, anti-tank guns. So the 2nd tank corps, we're also going to deploy you to the map. 3rd Guard Tank Corps. Hey, who would have thought? Anti-tank guns. They only have 16. We're going to move you to then, the 3rd Guards Tank Corps. So a little bit more serious of a unit there. Okay, so I think that's now 4 tank corps that we've added. We have some mechanized brigades here. I wonder if we go back to build. What would it take to do a mechanized corps? We need 3 mechanized brigade. So if we build a mechanized brigade, and we go to mechanized corps, doesn't look like it's ready. 0 units available. Okay, that's fine. So we'll wait there. Don't know there's much else we're gonna do here. Railroad Construction Brigade. Oh, our limit increased. We were actually above our limit for a while, but now our limit has increased. So I think we're going to build 3 of these. Yep, so build 3 railroad construction brigades. Excellent news. Do we have railroad construction brigades ready here? I know we had these engineer, but these are all engineer sapper battalions. Yeah, well, those are useless to me. Absolutely useless. It's probably not true, but I have a bit of a focus right now on our rail lines. Okay, well, I think that does it for the build and the reserves. Now when we look at our reinforcements and transfers, we see that next turn, we're going to have 4 tank corps coming into the map. And they're going to be deployed in Moscow. Good. So that's pretty close to the front line. Let's take the time, since they're at they're front of mind for us right now. Where would it be most useful on our front line to have 4 tank corps. Now, historically, I'm pretty sure that historically, the Soviets would have said, "Comrade, we need to send them to the Ukraine. The Ukraine is our economic base. It's it's where the Germans attacked and advanced for a reason. We need to get back these wide open stretches. And you know what? There's another benefit to putting them in the south by the Ukraine as well, that when you look at the terrain, and I'm actually going to take off the weather highlight that I have here real quick, if I can remember which button it is. Here we go. When we look at the terrain, it is very open, right? Like this is tank country. Whereas when we look in the north, we go, oh, well, that's a lot of forest, right? That's not ideal tank country. So it probably does make a lot of sense to put them down in the Ukraine. But I don't think we're going to. I think what we will end up doing is we will end up putting them in the north to assist with our attack on Riga. And I say this for a couple of reasons. One, yes, there's a lot heavier woods up here by Leningrad than if we look at our front line in our pocket here towards Riga. If you remember, our thought here is to kind of try a push from here, which is by this Velké Luky, and also to push right here in this pocket where we did actually have a bit of a breakout in the last episode, right? To push from here down to Peskov. Right, in kind of those two areas to push through. And where we have a lot of swamp here, our goal is not necessarily to maintain we're not going to maintain this this straight line going north to south all the way across. We're probably going to, it'll look like a bit of a pincer movement, envelopment, etc., where we're getting in behind these guys because of the lack of railroads moving from east-west here. When we look at the map from Velké Luky over to Riga, it is an east to west railroad that we can follow. Same situation here by Lake Ilmen, where there is this east to west railroad to Peskov. So that's one reason that I think we're going to bring those tank corps here, is that in this little front, there's not as many wooded hexes as there are in the north by Leningrad, right? So I don't think it's terrible tank country. It's not as nice as the Ukraine is. It's not as nice as Kursk is. I think it'll be a good spot for them. The second reason is that down here by Stalingrad, I actually think our issue is going to become pretty quickly the fact that we have more, I'm hoping this is the situation we'll find ourselves in that we have more armies than we may necessarily need in the Ukraine. Because right now our front is stretched in this big circle around this pocket. And we have 4 or 5 armies encircling Stalingrad. When really, once we get to Rostov, that significantly cuts down the width of our front. Right? So just picture from here to here, right? That's a dozen hexes north to south, right? If that's the front line, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 armies to fit into these 12 hexes. It means every 2 hexes is an army. And that's not including the 4 or 5 armies that we have encircling Stalingrad. So I think our density of units is actually going to be too great down here for a while. So those are kind of my reasons for saying that I think next turn when we get those tank corps on the map, I think I'm going to bring them over here to help with the push on Riga. Because when we look at this, our front line is already sitting at 1 army per 3 hexes. And as we push out, our front line is only going to become wider, not shorter, right? Because we need to build, just imagine you're like blowing a bubble, right? You're creating this bubble of a front line extending to Riga, which then, oh, I don't know, just rough math here, 20 hexes east-west times 2, because you need a north and a south of your front line. So that's 40 hexes to cover in addition to what we have right now. Maybe more, actually. So I think it makes sense that those tank corps come down here to help with that. I also think that we're probably going to need them simply from a standpoint of, we are looking at this, they have a number of really strong SS Panzer Grenadier divisions that we need to have some type of game plan for. We can hold them on this line, right? Our defensive positions, we can make it completely unappealing for them to try to break through here, especially since so much of it is heavy woods. But we need to start thinking about what happens if they move them south to counterattack our push on Riga. We need an answer if they do that. And those tank corps, I think, once they're at 100 combat preparation, they'd be much more of a fair fight against those SS Panzer Grenadier divisions. Okay, so we've done a lot of explanation for some of our thoughts, some of our strategy, and what we're going to have going on in the next episode. This time I actually am going to click intern, but first, out of paranoia, I'm going to click AI Manage Depots again, just to make sure I did it. And then going to end the turn. Air resupply goes through. You guys are probably getting pretty sick of every other episode listening to me to say the same commentary as it moves through the various phases of the turns. But sometimes that repetition can help Break to understand the mechanics of the game and how things are going. I do think it's interesting to looking at some of these destinations that they're doing the air resupply on. It really kind of stresses the railroad shortages that we were highlighting during our explanation of the mechanics phase. And I gotta say, I forget how beautiful the game map is when you're just looking at the terrain map mode and you don't have all the overlays on. I think we've spent the last 7 or 8 turns with the weather map overlay on, which is probably a shame because it really detracts from how great this map looks without all of that depressing snow sitting on top of it. So it is probably pretty fitting that all the hexes turned white and had snowflakes, and was a very constant reminder that every hex everywhere on the front line had snow. But you know, it's like spring is in the air or something like that. Looking at the map now, you see all this green, even though it's January 21st. It just looks nice. I really do have to compliment the developers on the visual appeal of the UI and the map in this game. And it's not to say that War in the West was ugly, or that War in the East 1 was necessarily ugly either, although certainly that game released about a decade ago, so it today looks a little more dated, but for its time it actually did look pretty good. Just think they did a very good job with the visual appeal of the map and the UI in this game. The Germans are executing their air phase, and what we see is that they're running no sorties. They're in day 5 here, and they have run no sorties. So it looks like they followed our lead in saying, yeah, we've had 7 straight weeks of blizzard. We don't need to send up any aircraft. And now they're going through their ground phase. So this is where we get to see if there's counterattacks. But first they do their air resupply. And look, oh wow. Look now at their units and the supply situations. Those were all green last turn. So I wonder if these air resupplies change the status of any of those supply indicators around Stalingrad. They are really trying to deliver some freight there. My goodness. All right, counterattack. And they were very successful. Wow. We held there, though, thank goodness. We don't need them pushing through to Leningrad right now. Oh, my. They broke through. Holy crap, they broke through. That's not good. Ah, jeez. Again, we got pushed out of that hex. I just want to advance past Lake Ilmen. Okay, we held there. This feels like a complete repeat of the previous turn. In terms of their counterattacks, we probably should have saw this coming. We held in the same spots and we lost in the same spots for the most part so far. The only difference is this time they actually broke through. And that's probably because we put so much emphasis on trying to knock out the pocket that was behind our lines. And what I didn't even touch on is one of the reasons for the importance of that pocket was we really can't repair the railroads and get railroads running to Leningrad until we solve for that unit being in that hex that's surrounded. Down by Orel, it actually looks like they did a counterattack, and this is the first we've seen them do anything even remotely close to Stalingrad on a counterattack in a couple of turns. I'm really curious to see if they do anything around Smolensk, because that is where they had the most success last turn. But it doesn't look like they're going to. So this time it was a reverse of what happened in turn 9. So in turn 9, we held them all along the Leningrad front, and they routed a couple units and counterattacked a couple of units in the Smolensk area with success. This turn, it was the exact opposite, where we held around Smolensk, but we lost by Leningrad. So I think we're going to have our work cut out for us when we get to our ground phase in the next episode for turn 10. I really do have a great appreciation for the AI in this game. It does continue to surprise me. And again, I talked about in the last episode about trying to not become too aware of all the minute details of the historical dates and times of all of the captures of cities and such, right? To try to let this emerge as our own world as we battle out this front line. But just their behavior, right? The AI's behavior has certainly surprised me, and I've appreciated it. There was actually one game that I was playing when I first got my hands on War and These 2. It was probably about a week before I started recording this series. And I had dabbled with the Stalingrad to Berlin campaign, and I got to like turn 4 or 5, something like that. And in that game, and I thought things had played out pretty close to how we've kind of progressed with our strategies. But in that game, on turn 3, I think it was, turn 2 or turn 3, the Germans actually evacuated Stalingrad. They pulled back the entire 6th Army and reestablished a new front line to protect Rostov and the Ukraine. I was really kind of stunned by it, because I thought there would be something that said, you know what, AI to maintain some historical accuracy, right? Keep the 6th Army there. But they had pulled back, which was wonderful to see. Okay, so that got us through the AI's turn movement. We're now at the turn summary, and we see that we had a total of 70,000 losses in men, 1,200 losses in gun platforms, 400 in armored fighting vehicles, and 42 in airframes. 42 airframes lost, guys. Isn't that exciting? That number's been 200 to 300 for the last 5 turns. We finally figured out how to get our settings right on the AI for the AI assist of air doctrines and air groups to really bring down the number of losses that we had in the air. And I think all of those probably came from counterattacks to German air resupply. Again, based off of the mechanics that exist for, yeah, you know what? If they're flying planes over our air bases, it makes a lot of sense to just hop in the plane real quick and try to shoot them down, right? Order of battle changes, so kind of net changes to how many men are on the map. We lost 26,000, 140 fewer gun platforms. We saw an increase in 381 armored fighting vehicles. I am very relieved to see that, because we had about 3 turns of net losses in armored fighting vehicles, with the Germans having net gains. So I'm really pleased to see that turnaround. In airframes, we also saw a positive turnaround in terms of number of airframes on map. The Germans lost 30,000 men. So they actually net had worse losses than we did in men. Lost 90 gun platforms, and they only picked up 140 armored fighting vehicles, and they gained 40 airframes. So if we can keep like these trends here in terms of the turn summary order of battle changes in net, pretty happy with that. What I'm a little more disappointed with, though, is that our supply situation got a little worse from last turn. So in turn 8, we had 133, I think it was, units on low supply, which was approximately a third, or a little less than a third of our units, right? In turn 9, that number was 120. So I felt like we had made some progress by being a little more conservative across our front line. This turn, we're at 135 in low supply. So it must continue to be our focus in terms of not overextending ourselves from rail lines that are functional, supply depots that are in range, and our general supply, fuel, and ammunition supply levels of units, especially if we're using them to attack. Let's now take a quick look at the news events that occurred in the last turn. It looks like the 8th Air Force continues their raids, which caused damage to railroads and heavy industry in Germany. Oh, wow. So the British forces have occupied Tripoli, which is a campaign progression in the North Africa campaign against the Germans. So it looks like the Allies had a success there. But it also looks like the Germans had a ground success because they committed extra resources to the North Africa theater box. The North African campaign events are moved back, and so are the Italian campaign events. And we've had this for 2 turns in a row now. So it sounds like the Germans are putting a lot of emphasis on making sure that the North African theater box has the units that it needs to be successful. And then, once again, we see Soviet partisans continue to harass the Germans in occupied territory. So with that, we've had quite a long episode. Turn 9 in total took a little longer than other turns, but I feel it was pretty important to dive into, at the very least, an intro to supplies and depots and why we need to be so concerned about them. In the next episode, we're really going to focus on continuing to try to correct that situation and continuing to be conservative with our forces. And as always, in each turn, we'll introduce a new mechanic or two to review. With that, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video and this series. I really do hope you've been enjoying it. Should you have any questions, feedback, or comments for the videos or about the game, please leave them in the comments section. I'll do my best to address them. And as always, if you feel that you can like or subscribe to the channel, really helps get the game's name out there on YouTube for the genre and such. And also, I really want to make sure that this style of gameplay review and let's play can be leveraged by newer players who may find this game daunting at first, and that this is hopefully a way for them to easily get into it and think about how every turn they too can kind of take a different mechanic or a gradual learning approach to the game, as opposed to being overwhelmed by the 520-page manual that accompanies the game. So with that, signing off, have yourselves a great day, strategy gamers, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.